My name's Rachel, I'm 28 and I identify as Black. My mum is Guyanese and my dad is British. Growing up, I lived with both my parents, three siblings, a couple of cats, and life was really, really good, I can't lie. It was very, very stable. We didn't have tons of money. Everything that my parents had, they definitely put into our education, sent us to private school. But it was fine. I mean, it was a great childhood. Um, but constantly being around people who didn't really look like me was definitely quite a challenge. I also trained as a classical dancer till I was 21, which brought its own problems as well. Again, not being your sort of stereotypical person in that role was quite difficult. And it definitely caused a lot of insecurities for me growing up. It definitely caused me to have a lot of self-doubt. Yeah. I think for me, I didn't identify as any race, and that's where it got a little bit tricky in my own mind. I knew that the world would never see me as white, but because of my peers, I felt very white. I definitely tried to fit into that space. But I always felt there was a bit of a battle between the way I was trying to present myself and the way that the world saw me. And I was really adamant. It like hurts me to even say it. I'm embarrassed to say it, but I was absolutely adamant that I was not going to identify as Black. There was just no way on this earth that I was going to identify as Black. And denying that whole side of me just caused so much turmoil in my own mind and my own spirit. There was a whole part of my being that I completely denied and completely tried to squash down. And so I was very just sort of like one foot in, one foot out, didn't know where I fit into, didn't identify as anything. And yeah, it was just a really difficult space to be in. Definitely. 100%. I mean, my whole identity was an issue. There wasn't any part of it that I claimed as my own. There wasn't any part of myself that I really recognized in the mirror. The person I saw looking back at me was not the person that I wanted to be portraying to the world, or it wasn't the person that I wanted the world to see me as. Um, so yeah, the entirety of my identity was an issue for me personally, um, but also just mentally, just a really horrible space to be in when you can't identify with yourself and who you are and the person looking back at you. And I would have done anything to be different, but I was who I was, and that was definitely something I had to work through. But yeah, the whole thing was an issue. My mum is Black, but I think her experience of growing up, so she was born here and she moved to Guyana when she was 9. And so she was conscious enough to appreciate the education that she had had here and the experience that she'd had here. And she definitely took that as a kind of proud thing. When she went to Guyana, and the fact that she lived in England and had been around white people and had that kind of experience, she definitely felt very proud about that. And I think that's always kind of pushed her to be a certain kind of way. So growing up, my mum just isn't the kind of person I mean, it's a really difficult one. My mum loves reggae, for instance, and she'll just blast it out. But I honestly can't ever remember her really doing that when I was younger. She listened to like a lot of Celine Dion and Enya and U2. Like that was my like musical background when I was younger. I think it's probably taken her the kind of same journey that I've been on. She's probably been on as well, and it's taken her a few years to really feel comfortable to embrace her culture and to like what she likes and to do what she wants to do and speak the way she wants to speak and all those kind of things. But it just meant that I had no kind of Black education, no kind of Black cultural experience when I was growing up, besides food. My mum's a great cook, and so food-wise, I definitely did. But I had to learn it. Once I got Black friends, I had to learn. It was embarrassing, quite frankly. I had to pick it up. I had to learn. I had to do my own research when they would like talk about certain things. I would have to go away and like listen to that music, or I don't know, like Google that person, and or like what was that program called? Like Boondocks. Like everyone was like obsessed with that, and I just had no idea what it was. I had no idea. So I had to like go away and like find out and be like, oh, okay, it's like, oh, it's cool to laugh at this. Okay, great. Like, and just kind of find my feet in that. But I definitely feel like with like the help of my friends, just by like piling all of this culture onto me, I definitely had to do the work myself. And it's still something, I mean, there are still times, people will bring things up and I'll be like, oh yeah, that song, like, don't know it, really don't know, but everybody else seems to know it. So it's another part that I just like missed out on. So yeah, so me mostly, I just had to educate myself, had to get on board and just get on with it. Yeah. I think my earliest memory of really understanding it was being on holiday with both my parents and I think my sister, and overhearing a conversation that my parents were having just about how they were getting funny looks or maybe a funny comment here or there because they were an interracial couple with mixed race kids. I was really young at the time. I don't think I'd ever really questioned my parents being from different cultures before that moment, and the fact that that had resulted in them having brown children. I think before that moment, I'd felt uncomfortable in my own skin. I noticed that I was different from my friends, but I never saw race as an issue until that moment. And that was really embarrassing for me, if I'm being completely honest. I remember feeling really self-aware and self-conscious about the fact that my parents were different colours, about the fact that I was a brown person, and just realising that that actually meant something to other people, that they would look at us and think something of it, regardless of whether it's positive or negative. It had never occurred to me before that point that race had a meaning to people. So yeah, I think that's probably my earliest memory of really noticing race and really understanding that it was something that meant something. Definitely not at all. I think we've been really fortunate that both sides of the family haven't had any kind of issue with my parents being together, haven't had any kind of issue with us being brown children. Both sides of the family have been really accepting of one another. They've all met each other, and I never noticed any kind of conflict growing up. And I think so much so that my parents, it didn't even occur to them growing up to have any kind of conversation about it in the house or to even acknowledge it. I don't remember ever having any kind of conversation or sitting down with my parents and then being like, okay, like mummy's black, daddy's white, this is what it means, blah, blah, blah. There was just no kind of acknowledgement, but in the best way. There was no acknowledgement because there was no conflict at all. I think as a family unit, with us all being together, I can't remember any time, apart from like the odd stare or the odd comment, I can't really remember any time where someone made like an overt racist gesture or racist comment towards us. I know my parents faced quite a lot of racism when they started seeing each other sort of in the late 80s, and mostly from Black people having a problem with my mum dating a white guy. I know that was definitely a bit of an issue for them. I think more so for my dad. I think it kind of went over my mum's head. She's not the kind of woman that would necessarily care about that, but it definitely, they had things shouted at them. And I think my mum growing up in the 60s here as well, obviously faced some like overt racism. But I mean, that in my own personal life, there have been a handful of occasions, I could probably count them on one hand, where somebody has said something outrageous. And even in those moments, it's so outrageous, you kind of just brush it off. You don't even care because it's so out there. It really is a them problem and not, for you to take on. But I don't, as like a family unit, I don't think I haven't noticed anyway, I don't think we faced any kind of racism. School was definitely a tricky one. I was the only black girl in my year from reception till year 6, which obviously presented so many issues. Those are sort of your formative years. I had great friends. They were all white girls, apart from one maybe half Indian girl who was also brown, but I never looked at her and saw any kind of similarity. I definitely put her in the group of my other friends, and then I was the one that was different. And that really meant, I think like most kids, I was one of those kids that just wanted to fit in. There was nothing in me that I never wanted to stand out. I didn't want anything to be different. And so I literally just did the most to basically try and be white, or as like, I knew I couldn't be white. So all my mannerisms, or the way that I spoke, or the way that I dressed, the music I listened to, the TV programs I watched, everything was sort of geared that way, geared towards being as like white presenting as possible. And then I hit secondary school, and that's probably where I think probably around year 8, I formed a really good group of black girlfriends who are still like my best friends to this day. And I think that was probably the start of me claiming my blackness, or at least starting to be okay with it. But it was a really interesting one, because I definitely faced that dilemma of not being black enough and not being white enough. And I kind of felt stuck in the middle. My friends were great. They never sort of made any issue with it. They never called me out for anything. They never said anything to me about it. But I definitely noticed that there were large parts of culture that I had just never come across, be it music. To this day, like, people will still talk about, music from like the 2000s that I just don't know, or like musicians that I just don't know. And it's because I turned my back on all of that growing up, and I had no interest. I didn't have anyone to even show me. So I definitely noticed that there was like a big part of my like black education that was just missing. Also, the kind of school that we went to was not geared or prepared to celebrate different cultures. They had one way of doing things. It was very white centric. I mean, probably 95% of the students there were white, so you can understand why. But I almost think that means that more needed to be done to make sure that minority students did feel accepted or felt heard, or that their cultures were accepted or celebrated. I don't think students and teachers had enough education on how to have a dialogue with minority students, or how to address certain issues. A friend, one of my best friends, there was one time she was in her English class. She was the only black girl in there, and the word Negro came up in a book, and the teacher stopped, singled her out, and asked her if she thought it was okay to like use that word. And obviously she was probably like 14 or 15 at the time. She wasn't equipped to like have some deep discussion about like the root of the word and the context and this and that. And it just, you just think, if that teacher had had a little more awareness, they never would have done that. She never would have felt singled out for being black. Or just small things as well, like as a black girl, you change your hair a lot. Like sometimes you're going to have braids, sometimes your hair's going to be straight, sometimes you're going to have weave, sometimes it's going to be natural. And that can change in a weekend. You know, Friday you left looking one way, Monday you come back looking a different way. And kids would literally laugh, or they would literally be like, what? Like, I don't get it. Like, that's not your hair. Like, what is it? Like, and making you just feel really like embarrassed almost. I remember I killed my hair straightening it every single day. I would literally look on the floor and have little pieces of broken hair around my feet every single day because I just wanted it to be straight every day, no questions asked, looks like everybody else. Even things like summer holidays, I used to get so anxious. Looking back, it's so stupid. I used to get so anxious around summer holidays because I knew the sun was going to be out. I knew I'd be outdoors. Maybe I'd be going on holiday. And I didn't want to tan. I just didn't want to tan. I didn't want to come back to school in September and be darker. And I used to literally like Google sun creams specifically for Black people that specifically stop them tanning, as if like there's a product like that even exists. And just the anxiety I had around people noticing that I was Black was insane. It was insane. Again, like I had, like all my friends at that point were Black, but I still didn't feel comfortable to be identified as Black. Yeah, school was just, people were just not equipped. They were not equipped to handle. I can only speak from the Black side. I mean, I don't know if other minority students had the same experience, but they just were not equipped or taught how to have conversations about it, or how to, you know, make students feel accepted, or just not noticed, just not making people feel like they're standing out. Racist jokes as well, like that was we definitely went through like a phase of that at my school where kids would just throw racist jokes around like they were absolutely nothing, and you never felt as though you could say anything about it. You never felt like you could say, actually guys, like it's not really funny. Can you not? You kind of just had to stand there, and like it's embarrassing now to think back and say, but you did kind of have to stand there and be like, yeah, good one. There was just no awareness. There was no awareness at all. And it's a bit scary to think like these are people, adults now, like in the world and amongst many different people and coming into contact with loads of different people. So yes, school was really, really tricky. Funnily enough, I think the most, the groups that we had the most problems with, though, were probably other Black girls in the year. And sort of one of the biggest insults that they could say is like, okay, white girl, and like call you out for being white, or for like portraying yourself as white, or having white behaviors, or speaking in like a white way. So probably amongst like Black girls, that was most difficult, definitely. Definitely got the usual ones, like, how do you even brush your hair? What do you mean? How do I brush my with a brush? With a brush, just like you. Or does your hair ever get tangled? Does your hair even grow? Or like the standard people just touching your hair. I think as time has moved on, people definitely have gotten more aware, and that has lessened a lot. But now I feel as though that's almost been replaced by these weird kind of like backhanded compliments. So I have had like a few white guys say to me, if I'm like dating them or seeing them, say to me, oh, like you're not my usual type. And I know what that means. That obviously means you don't date Black girls normally. That's what it means. But it's almost, they say it almost in the way of like, you should be like appreciative, or like, this is a compliment. I'm complimenting you by saying you're not my usual type. You're like acceptable to me. Like I've gone outside my boundaries, but I find you attractive. So well done you. Or just, I think with all this like BLM stuff going on. I've had, to be honest, I've tried to avoid the conversations with some of my white friends, but I have had like a few conversations about it. And a couple of people have said to me, have asked me how I identify. And when I say Black, they're literally shocked. And their comment all the time without fail is, I don't even see you as Black though, Rachel. Like, I don't see you as Black. I just see you as Rachel. And again, they say it like it's a compliment, like somehow stripping me of race is like, wow, well done. You've made it. Like, you've leveled up. You're better than that. You're just Rachel. And it's like, no, I think you're missing like the fundamental issue here. I think you're missing the point. I am Black. I identify as Black. And that's my choice. So to say that I shouldn't, or that I am other, in their eyes, is an insult. It's, it's me once again not being listened to, not being heard. And I almost think that's like the new kind of like microaggression coming in. I don't see race. And that's, well, it exists. So regardless of whether or not you see it, it's a conversation that needs to be had. It's something that you need to understand and understand what it means. And you just saying, I don't see it, I don't see you as that, isn't helpful. It's not helpful at all, and it's actually quite offensive. So yeah, I think microaggressions are changing, but they're really still there. I think it's really difficult to know. For most of my adult life, I haven't really worked in a job where I've either worked for myself or I've, worked one-on-one with somebody else. So not really in a situation where I could experience it. But I have for a few years, I had a desk job. And it wasn't the kind of job that I really wanted to progress in. So it's difficult for me to say. I mean, there came a point in that job where financially I needed to progress. And so I went up for it and I got it. But also in that job, there were a couple of occasions where I literally had to remind people that I was Black, where it sounds odd to say, but like, where like the Black faces in the office were being counted and mine was not counted. And actually having to say, oh, guys, it's me too. Like, I'm also in that category. So I don't know. I mean, I guess that has something to do with it as well. If people aren't seeing you as Black, it's really difficult to kind of know if you've faced systemic racism. I think the place where I've experienced it the most and the most overtly was when I was training to be a dancer and having curves, growing up, getting curves. I wasn't necessarily any bigger than the girls I was dancing with, but I had a different body shape. And I was told a number of times, I've got to diet, I've got to lose weight. And essentially all that was for was just to change my body shape. It wasn't because I was unhealthy or I was overweight. Just the way my body didn't fit the mold that they wanted it to fit into, which was quite discouraging, especially at that age. I kind of had dreams of, thank God it didn't happen, but like dreams of being like a ballet dancer or a contemporary dancer or something like that. And to hear that who you are, or just your genetics, the way that you are, puts you at a disadvantage, and for people to feel like they can really look in your face and say it, was really difficult. That was a really difficult thing to hear, and it really put me off going down that route. And I think if I had pursued it professionally for a long time, it definitely would have been something I faced. I think I definitely would have been held back, and very openly. I don't think it would have been hidden at all. So yeah, it's such a difficult one to know. You don't know. You don't always know whether it's happening to you or not, but that's my experience. Colorism is one of those things that I find really difficult to comment on. I think it's almost, I don't want to get cancelled, but like it's almost like asking a white person about systemic racism. When you're a lighter skinned person and you're asked about colorism, you do feel like it's not your subject to talk about, like it's not for you to speak on. And again, I think being like the benefitter of something like that, it's really difficult to stand in that place and notice it. I mean, I just don't know. I have heard my mum talk about the time that she spent living in Guyana, and there's definitely a culture over there where like the fairer you are, the better. Like the more beautiful you are, the more opportunities you'll have. So it's such a real issue, and I know here it is such a real issue. But it's really difficult for me to say whether it's something I've experienced. The only kind of comments I've heard about me being light-skinned have been quite negative, just from people saying like, oh, you know, you think you're too nice because you're mixed, blah, blah, blah. So I've experienced it in that way, but I think obviously the general dialogue around it is, you know, if you're fairer skinned, you do have more opportunities, or you're just viewed in a different way. And it's really difficult to know. And I think because most of my life I've been predominantly around white people, I've always just felt black in that. So I haven't really had an experience where I've been in a situation where I would notice it necessarily. Yes, it's just really hard. It's really hard for me to say, but I know it's an issue. I know it's definitely an issue. I really had to think long and hard about this. I think with the BLM movement, I have been asked recently a lot about how I identify, and what my Black experience has been. But in terms of being mixed, I can't really think of any sort of recurring questions that have come up. And I actually asked my sister if she could think of anything. And she made a really good point that when it comes to white people, when it comes to human beings in general, actually, you know, we either like to really, really divide, or we like to find the similarities in each other and kind of cling on to that. And I think when it comes to maybe like a white person asking questions, I think they're more eager to cling onto the similarities and not highlight the differences and not delve too deeply. I don't know. It's really, some of my best friends are white and they don't really ask anything about it. You know, they're very, and I mean this in like the most positive way, but you know, they're very here for Black culture, and Black food and Black music and Black men and, you know, that kind of way. But they don't like to delve too deep. That's been my experience. They don't like to delve too deep below the surface and really bring up any kind of substantial differences or any like root issues that they, you know, might have heard about but don't directly know about. So yeah, I don't think people really like to talk about it. I'm not gonna lie, I don't think people like to talk about it. Yeah, I think inevitably they do. And when I was thinking about this one, I don't know whether it has anything to do with race or whether it just has to do with the different ways in which men and women are treated. I actually don't have any mixed race male friends, but I do have a brother. And I think for him, it's a lot easier to embrace his culture, celebrate his culture, and have that seen as something very interesting and exotic and fun, and people wanting to like know a bit more about it. I think when you're a woman, there's almost like a pressure to fit into the space that people are comfortable with and fit into a space that people have created for you. And I think that does come into culture quite a lot. I've definitely felt that it's perhaps not as acceptable for me to be so outwardly celebratory of my culture, and you know, promoting, you know, I don't know, it could just have been my like own insecurities growing up as well. um but just even something like food, maybe not being so, I don't know, just not really talking about it, or not wanting to like serve anything ethnic or different, you know. Whereas I feel like for a guy, it's just, there's just that, I feel like they're allowed to embrace all of themselves in whatever area that is. And culture definitely comes into it. And I feel for women, it's very different. I feel like we're told to make ourselves smaller, and we're told not to be too out there, too big, too loud. And especially Black culture, it's so, do you know what I mean? Black culture is a party. Black culture is fun. It is loud. It is out there. Um, and I kind of feel like that goes against the way society wants women to be. And so I've definitely struggled with that. I've definitely struggled with like embracing my culture in front of people that don't share my culture, in a way that I've never seen my brother have to do. Privilege that I can identify is really being made to feel like, I'm like the acceptable face of Blackness, you know, like I'm a safe, comfortable Black person to be around, the one that like we want to push forward to the clients, or the one that we want to be in the meeting, or, you know, the one that we can go and get drinks with because, you know, she's like us, or like we can identify with certain parts of her, enough parts of her, to feel very comfortable. So much so, like I mentioned, you know, people forgetting that I am actually Black, or that I have a race. Um, so yeah, it's not, personally, I don't view it as a privilege. I find it quite offensive, but I think that kind of like the acceptable Black person in the room, I would say that's definitely something I felt. Definitely, I would say don't don't expect to see your face mirrored in the face of those around you, and don't expect to see, like your body in magazines. Don't expect to feel validated in that way. Definitely look for validation elsewhere. um, but also expect to be okay, and expect to find your feet. um, expect some hardships, but also expect to come through the other end. And definitely, it's not a full stop. It's not, this is not life. This is just a moment in time. Yeah, that's what I'd say.